In 1988, a gruesome murder in Greenfield, Massachusetts nearly canceled Halloween forever. 18-year-old Sharon Gregory was found mutilated in her bathtub. The prime suspect was Mark Branch, a slasher movie-obsessed teenager who had a disturbing love for Jason Vorhees. Like a lot of other channels, we covered this story years ago, but we were never satisfied with the result. This time, we're taking a deep dive and telling the complete tragic story of the Friday the 13th killer. Greenfield, Massachusetts is a small New England town where the culture is a mix of urban and rural that makes living there an idyllic place to be. Despite its modest population of fewer than 20,000 residents, this town is home to its own thriving community college. 18-year-old Sharon Gregory and her identical twin sister Cheryl attended Greenfield Community College as psychology majors. At around 8:45 a.m. on October 24, 1988, Sharon and Cheryl were getting ready to go to class. Their parents had already left for work earlier that morning, and Cheryl was heading out the door by the time Sharon had got out of the shower. She told her sister goodbye and left for school. What Cheryl didn't know was that it would be the last time that she will see her twin sister alive. When Cheryl returned home at 12:30 that afternoon, she immediately knew something was wrong. There was blood all over the floor. Terrified, Cheryl slowly followed the trail up the stairs and down the hallway. Her heart dropped as the trail went into the bathroom and stopped at the tub. What she saw was worse than any 80s slasher movie. It was her sister lying lifeless in the tub. Cheryl frantically called 911 and told them that Sharon was dead and she thought her twin ended her own life. But when police arrived at the scene and began to investigate, they realized there was too much blood. It didn't take long for the medical examiner to determine that the police had a homicide on their hands. Sharon had been stabbed multiple times in the face, back, and throat. It was an unreal nightmare for Sharon's family, and as they grieved, the one question on everyone's mind was, who killed Sharon? Sharon Gregory was born on March 26, 1970, and was followed 3 minutes later by Cheryl. The twins were the apple of their parents' eye, and from a young age, Sharon was fiercely independent. According to her mother, her daughter had a love of art and was a warm and open person that could talk to anyone even if she just met them. Sharon absolutely loved the outdoors and any and everything cat-related and had a sizable collection. She was smitten with her cat Normal, who was named after Garfield's arch-nemesis. The family was incredibly tight-knit, and the parents made it a point to travel and go to museums and expose the girls to things outside of their little community. In high school, the twins were popular and belonged to multiple clubs. In junior year, Sharon and some of her friends participated in a demonstration called Black Tuesday. The group wore all black in solidarity to show that gay students or anyone different had a right to be themselves. By her senior year, she and her high school sweetheart were talking about marriage after he left the Navy. And after she started college, she kept the same friend group. It was through their high school friends that the twins met 18-year-old Mark Branch. Anyone that spent any time with Mark knew that he was strange, and the twins were no exception. Like everyone else, they knew that Mark was obsessed with Friday the 13th. The day before the murder, the twins talked about how creepy Mark was. According to Cheryl, Sharon told her that she had been freaked out by the way Mark had been staring at her and that she was frightened by it. But it doesn't appear that anyone else noticed it. Mark's unsettling personality didn't start with Sharon. He had a lifelong list of disturbing behavior. Mark Branch was born on October 30th, 1969 in Connecticut, but moved to Greenfield when he was in elementary school. We don't know much of his childhood, but we do know that he was the youngest of 3. By the time he was a teenager, his siblings had already moved out of the state. Due to his struggle with mental illness all of his life, he didn't stay in the Greenfield school system for long. After 7th grade, his parents enrolled him in New Salem Academy, but he wasn't able to fit in. Almost immediately, he began sending threatening and sexually aggressive letters to female students. Mark's behavior escalated when he threatened a girl he liked with a knife because she didn't like him back. He was then transferred to McLean Psychiatric Hospital as a resident for his 10th and part of his 11th grade after he tried to take his life. Despite his struggles, his time at McLean seemed to have helped because halfway through his 11th grade year, he was allowed to commute to McLean's school and not be a resident. Things were starting to look up for Mark by the time he and his family moved to their new neighborhood on Meadow Lane. He got a job at a local grocery store and reconnected with a friend from elementary school, Scott Landry. It was probably one of the best times of his life because he was finally able to make real friends. They were into slasher movies like him, and they didn't make fun of his troubled past. Throughout it all, the one constant in Mark's life was his obsession with slasher movies. The gorier, the better. At 17, he began regularly dressing like Jason Vorhees and constantly wore heavy combat boots, work pants, and plaid shirts. In the 80s, being a part of a fandom was no joke. Getting posters and figurines was a real uphill battle, and Mark made it his mission to collect as much Friday the 13th merch as possible. Friends described Mark as quiet with very little ambition and a dry sense of humor. He told his friends that he'd amount to nothing and seemed pretty proud of it. Mark's one and only dream was to become the actor that played Jason, and at 6'1" and 180 pounds, he might have been a good fit. Sharon and Cheryl met Mark through Scout Landry. Mark didn't even try to keep the creepy things he did a secret. Out of the blue, he once told Cheryl that on Halloween 1987, he dressed up like Jason and jumped out of the bushes to chase a girl that walked by, and he casually told her that he would have stabbed the girl if he didn't trip. Mark's goal was to try the same thing again that Halloween. Despite clearly admitting to attempted assault, his friends never really took him seriously. They just thought he was a little weird, and that was alright with them. It was August 1988, and by now, close friends knew that Mark had been in and out of mental institutions for his violent behavior, but they never pressed him for details. One day, for reasons unknown, Mark brought his psychological profile with him when he visited Scott while Cheryl was there. Cheryl became interested in it and asked if she could take it home to read, and Mark agreed under the conditions that once she was done with it, she couldn't tell anyone what she saw and to burn it. At the very least, we know that Cheryl told Sharon about the profile. At some point, what little relationship the twins had with Mark soured. According to one of his friends, Mark said that he was angry with the twins because they had mocked him. However, no one knew what they said to him to make Mark so mad. On October 22nd, Scott called the Gregory residence and Sharon answered the phone. He wanted to know if her sister still had the profile because Mark wanted it back. After a brief search, Sharon found the profile and told Scott that Cheryl still had it. It was Monday, October 24th, and Cheryl still had Mark's psychological profile. And the longer that Cheryl had that profile, the angrier Mark became. We don't know exactly what Cheryl or Sharon planned on doing with the profile, but it's speculated that one of the twins planned to use it for an assignment for school. At around 8:15 a.m., Scott gave Mark a ride to the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, which is a state vocational aid program for the mentally disabled. Scott picked Mark up around 9:15 a.m., and the two headed to Scott's house to record music videos off of MTV. It was 10:07 a.m. when Sharon called Scott crying. Her car wouldn't start, and she had no idea what was wrong. She tried to call her boyfriend and couldn't reach him at school, and so she asked if Scott had a car that she could use. Scott told her that he was driving his dad's truck and didn't have a personal car that she could borrow. Always a good friend, Scott talked her through the process of getting her car started and told her to call him back if it didn't work. What Scott didn't realize was that Mark was paying close attention to the conversation. He nonchalantly asked who was on the phone, and Scott explained what was going on with Sharon and that she was home alone. About 15 minutes later, Mark asked Scott to take him home because he wanted to drive his car to pick up his paycheck. But that wasn't his true intention. Mark drove his gray Chevrolet Chevette to the Gregory's home, and just as calmly as he pleased, he walked up to the front door and turned the knob. Cheryl forgot to lock the door. What happened next is what the investigators speculate. After Mark walked into the home, he spotted Sharon and chased her up the stairs, then cornered her in the bathroom. The police believe that he tried to imitate the bathroom scene from Friday the 13th, the final chapter. He then blocked the door and began the attack, leaving her for dead in the tub. 5 minutes later, Mark calmly drove away like nothing happened. But what he didn't know was that a neighbor saw him leave the Gregory home. Once the investigation began, Mark immediately became the prime suspect. Cheryl told the investigators how Sharon became increasingly frightened of Mark. While conducting interviews, Mark Branch's name was mentioned repeatedly. That was the beginning of the manhunt for the Friday the 13th killer. It didn't take long for news about Sharon's gruesome murder to sweep through the town. Terror ran up the spines of every resident of Greenfield. Once the police chief was granted a warrant for Mark's arrest, the state police descended onto the small town. Not only were the state police involved, but the police departments from 3 surrounding towns were also on the hunt. On the morning of Tuesday, October 25th, the police found Mark's car abandoned on a dirt road near a town called Buckland that's about 30 minutes from Greenfield. The car's seats, floor, and the gear shift were covered in blood and cigarette ash. Armed with shotguns and search dogs, the police searched the woods near the location of Mark's car. They even set up a blockade down the road to keep people out of the area. After the investigators were granted a search warrant for Mark's home, they were struck by how immaculate Mark's room was. And at first, they didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Everything was neatly put in its place. It was when they took a closer look into Mark's bookshelves and cabinet did they realize there was something different about Mark. There were nearly 100 VHS tapes of slasher movies that included several from the Friday the 13th series, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I Spit on Your Grave. He also had several copies of Friday the 13th movies, including 3 of Friday the 13th Part 3. His cabinets were filled with over 100 horror-related magazines, Jason figurines, 6 Jason hockey masks, and a Michael Myers mask. The police realized that Mark wasn't a typical fan when they found his secret collection of multiple hunting knives and a machete in his bedroom closet. Rumors ran rampant in the early days of the search. Because the police were tight-lipped about the details of the case, locals started making up their own stories of what happened. One rumor that was going around was that Mark was a part of a satanic cult called Dark Tuesday. It was a twisted lie based on the show of solidarity Sharon and her friends participated in at school. Mark didn't even attend the same high school as Sharon and her friends. Every little crime and odd occurrence was now being blamed on Mark Branch. He became Greenfield's boogeyman. Police Chief David McCarthy immediately nipped that rumor in the bud. He told reporters that nothing about the scene of the crime indicated any sort of cult activity. Since Sharon's murder happened in the height of the satanic panic, just about every crime was attributed to Satan worshippers. Despite the efforts of Greenfield police to calm everyone down, hysteria hit the town like a ton of bricks. Once Mark's obsession became publicly known, this local tragedy suddenly became a national headline. It didn't help that the murder happened a week before Halloween. All that together inflamed the media about the Friday the 13th killer. National news outlets descended on the small town, and there were dozens of think pieces about the role of violent media on American teens. Tensions ran so high that Greenfield Town Selectmen canceled Halloween. Their nighttime Rag Shack parade was canceled, and trick-or-treating was designated from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. on October 30th, all in the fear that Mark would strike again. As the manhunt intensified, Sharon's funeral was held on October 29th. Carried by 6 pallbearers in a lacquered lavender casket, Sharon Gregory was laid to rest. Over 200 people attended her funeral and paid their last respects to the 18-year-old. The cars lined up about a quarter of a mile for the procession, and while the Gregorys grieved, Mark was nowhere to be found. The search extended throughout Massachusetts, and the police sent a bulletin throughout New England that Mark was on the loose, armed and dangerous, and that he would kill again. This created a flurry of calls to the police of Mark Branch sightings. There were calls that ended up a farmer walking down the road, and one sighting of Mark turned out to be a little girl. There were even psychics that called the police and claimed they knew where Mark was. That Halloween, the entire town was on edge. The local movie theater even agreed to postpone the premiere showing of Halloween 4. The police were also worried that troublemakers or frightened townspeople might mistake someone for Mark and take justice into their own hands. As afternoon turned into night, Greenfield was like a ghost town, as mostly all of the events were canceled. The police even tripled the number of cruisers on the street. The next morning, Greenfield let out a collective sigh of relief when nothing happened. With so much wooded area in a 3-town radius, Mark could have been hiding anywhere. The police got their first lead when someone in Buckland, a town about 15 miles away, reported a break-in. The homeowner said that winter clothing, a knife, and food were stolen on November 2nd. But even after searching the home and the surrounding area, Mark was nowhere to be found. The hunt for Mark continued into November, and life tentatively went on, but there was still fear that he could kill again. Finally, the threat was over when Mark Branch was found hanging from a tree on November 29, 1988, by a hunter on the second day of deer hunting season. According to the police, the location where he was found was only 100 yards away from the area they originally searched. And the reason why they didn't see him the first time was due to the angle of his body and how wooded the area was. The autopsy revealed that he probably died within a few days of Sharon's murder. When Mark's father was told about the demise of his son, he said, "We're just glad it's over. It's time to forget and carry on as best we can." And with that, the case was closed. But the main question remained, why would he commit such a horrible crime? After everything was said and done, police revealed the most likely motive. It was the psychological profile. While no one knows exactly what was in this profile, it has been speculated that it contained information like case histories, treatment recommendations, and the results of personality tests from multiple psychiatric hospitals that Mark was a patient of. The police believe that Sharon planned on using it in an assignment and that she kept the profile longer than promised. They believe that Mark was already upset about the profile, and combined with his desire to kill, he took the opportunity of Sharon being home alone and murdered her. Grief counselors from Boston held sessions at the local high school as well as the community college to help people cope with Sharon's death. The town held vigils for Sharon in honor of her memory because they felt that she was lost in the media circus. And as the dust began to settle, there were even more questions about Mark Branch's mental health and the care that he received. Police Chief David McCarthy stated that Mark fell through the cracks of the Massachusetts mental health system. He said, "Mr. Branch is in absolute fear that it's going to happen again. Mr. Branch told me that there were a lot of Marks out there." The Branches spent tens of thousands of dollars over the years in an effort to get Mark the mental care that he so desperately needed. Sharon's parents showed compassion to Mark's family and didn't blame them for what Mark did. The Gregorys said that the Branches were suffering from the loss of a child, just like them. When Halloween rolled around in 1989, the town council were at a crossroads. They were debating about canceling Halloween. But once Sharon's mother found out about the town's plan, she called the town selectman and told him, "Let the kids trick-or-treat." And Halloween returned to Greenfield. Thank you for watching the Twin Files. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps us out. This case was